world came to the U.S. In this case, big part of the news was in the U.S. this week, and it was Zelensky. Zelensky just spoke to Congress, demanded more planes, demanded more tanks. He said 45 billion is not enough, it's not sufficient. Yet the Democrats were literally drooling over him and saying that he's a new Churchill. This is like Churchill in 41, draping themselves in the Ukrainian flag. Jacob, can you comment on just the lunacy of it? We know what Zelensky is. We know what he's been about. We know what the Biden administration is about, and they seem to find a kindred spirit in Zelensky.
Let me preface my remarks by saying that I think, well, certainly myself, but I think most people in Moriel, if not all, probably all, but certainly myself and anyone I know in Moriel, would have tremendous sympathy for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian people. They would be opposed to Putin. I personally warned about Putin for some time. I've said he was a neo-Stalinist many years ago, with aspirations of trying to scavenge or salvage what he can of the old Soviet Empire and the Warsaw Pact. That is his ambition. We have nothing but empathy for the Ukrainian people. However, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. It is completely illegal for NATO to attack a country that's not attacked a NATO country. Now, that law was violated by Tony Blair, by Bill Clinton, by Javier Solano, and by Wesley Clark when we intervened effectively against the Serbs, who are no angels, but on behalf of the Kosovo Liberation Army, who are aligned with Al-Qaeda. Completely illegal. I consider Clinton and Blair to be war criminals. They had no legal right to do what they did under the NATO Charter. It was illegal. Right now, we have a proxy war in the Ukraine. Ukraine, as I've said repeatedly, is not doing well. They've had 100,000 killed, 100,000. Many civilian casualties, and their national infrastructure is being decimated by Russia. Nobody is winning that war. Nobody is winning that war. The victories, as they appear to be, against Putin and against Russia, it's basically the Ukrainians acting as NATO surrogates. There are obviously mercenaries, civilian contractors is the euphemism, fighting inside the Ukraine. It's not the Ukrainian people who are at the forefront of what's happening. It's the muscle and money on back of them. Once again, it's a ripoff of the American taxpayer. Why is the United States putting over 3 times as much money into this cause than our European so-called allies? Why aren't the Europeans picking up their share of the tab? Why are we putting in 3 times as much money as the EU? Why? Again, the Europeans getting the Americans to fight their battles for them the same as they did in Yugoslavia. Same as they did in World War I. That's what it comes to. Another ripoff of the American people. This is not to say I do not agree with standing with the Ukrainian people. But the most logical, strategically and politically, focus of foreign policy should be to press for a negotiated settlement, ceasefire, and move to negotiation.
Yeah, no one's talking peace. No one's talking about peace. It's just war, war, war.
Putin is in trouble, but the Ukraine is in trouble. Now, I don't favor making any concessions to Putin, but I do favor giving him some face-saving gesture just to get out of there and stop this destruction of the Ukraine that is going to hurt the Ukrainian people and has killed tens of thousands of them already and is going to kill more.
I have not heard anybody talking about an exit strategy. I mean, what's the end goal? What is the exact end goal?
This is exactly what Bush did in Iraq. This is what Johnson did in Vietnam. What is the exit strategy? There is none.
That's right. There's none. Yeah.
Now, I do not believe it's in the national interest of the Ukrainians to continue the way it is. Somebody needs to broker a peace.
That's right.
Now, the people like Macron, they're too weak. Biden is too senile. I just don't see any way out of this.
I know. It reminds me.
Additionally, Ukraine, although, again, I have sympathy for the Ukrainian people, Moriel is involved in helping Ukrainian war refugees. We have a work based in Poland. We just sent in more heater ovens for the winter because they have no electricity, no heat.
No electricity.
We're active. Yeah. We're one of many thousands of ministries and organizations who are active there, but we're active helping the people, and they have our sympathies. We don't like what Putin did. He had no right to invade their country. However, Ukraine was a corrupt country with a corrupt government. Just look at Hunter Biden. Follow the money. Does anybody think there's not a connection between Hunter Biden's financial shenanigans in the Ukraine and what's happening now with the Democratic Party?
Add to that the Obamas, the Bidens, Victoria Nuland, McCain.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And now it's gone to the point where Zelensky is not just saying he wants to liberate his country. He wants to have a regime change in Russia.
Yeah.
Look what this regime change strategy has resulted in Iraq and Afghanistan. You're not going to change Russia. There is this stupid idea that people have that what the United States did after the Second World War in Japan with MacArthur, in order for MacArthur to have brought about the kind of fundamental change in Japan that he did, I've said this before, he had to demythologize the Shinto religion and emperor worship. Unless you are ready, despite the political cost, to demythologize Islam, you're not going to bring any real regime change to the Muslim world.
That's right. That's right.
It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen in Russia either. The czars were terrible. The Politburo were just as bad as the czars and even worse. Putin has not changed Russia. He simply neo-Stalinized it. It doesn't change. You cannot possibly change it in the manner they're trying to change it. You can only change something in terms of real regime change is if you do what MacArthur did. You'd have to MacArthurize it. And nobody's going to do that.
No, not in this day and age.
Nobody's going to demythologize the Russian Orthodox Church. Nobody is going to demythologize Russian nationalism. They don't even know what countries constitute Russia. They argue among themselves. Russians think that Ukraine and they think that Belarus are part of Russia.
Right.
It's undefined. It's a corrupt country with a corrupt government. Zelensky has been an opponent of human rights and of civil liberties. He is no friend of freedom. He is simply a lesser of two evils. That's all. He's a lesser of two evils.
Nonetheless evil, and what he's doing with Christians or even with religious liberties is absolutely uncalled for, and people just support him like he's some kind of hero.
A lesser of evils is an evil no less. It's like this. Marshal Tito was not a champion of Yugoslavian democracy, but it was overrun by Hitler and Mussolini.
Yeah.
So the people rallied to him.
Right.
Okay. It's the same thing. Putin has invaded the country, so people rallied to Zelensky. That doesn't mean he's a good guy. Marshal Tito was not a good guy. He's just a strong man who's against a worse man.
Yeah.
That's all you have.
Did you see the invocation about Hanukkah and he's a warrior like the Maccabees? Oh man, this is for sure a delusion and of a man who's really, in a lot of ways, a war criminal against people, and yet he's Churchill now. For the Democrats, he's Churchill. I mean, this is
There's
bizarre.
nothing Churchillian about him.
I,
You
I,
know,
I,
they want to protect the borders of the Ukraine, but they don't want to protect the borders of the United States.
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
The
absolutely.
hypocrisy of the Democratic Party knows no bounds. Now, again, I'm not saying that we should sever or discontinue our support for Ukraine, but it needs to be redefined and dictated by us. What we give, the armaments we provide, the money we provide, needs to be dictated by us, not by the recipient, making more and more demands while the Europeans are giving pocket change. We're giving billions.
Yeah. And nonetheless, there's movement upon the border of Ukraine and Belarus this weekend. Coming into the weekend, we have several troops coming in there. S-400 missiles, about 100 tanks coming into the Belarus-Ukraine border, and of course, as a response to the U.S. giving $45 billion to Zelensky, Patriot missiles. I think he wants Abrams tanks and he wants F-16s, which the U.S. hasn't provided. But it seems to be, even after this conversation, an escalation of war with no end in sight.
Abrams tanks should never be given to the Ukraine.
Yeah, he's asking for them.
And too expensive to operate, and takes too long to train the tank crews. You have basically a jet engine on something that weighs over 70 tons with a jet engine and a huge gun, and then you need vehicles to transport the M1s. It's not a conventional tank. The German Leopard tanks would be a much better option.
Yeah.
But where's the German? Where are the Germans?
No, they're not around. Dangerous escalation, no doubt. And Greece has actually been pressured by the U.S. government just recently to send S-300 missiles to Ukraine. So Greece is being pushed along by the Biden administration. So again, this is from the Prime Minister. The government is mulling over the delivery of this S-300s. What does that say about Greece?
Something about the S-300 and the S-400. The S-300 and the S-400, which are Russian systems, have been outmaneuvered by both the Israelis, flying American F-35s. F-22s can also easily evade the S-400. The Israelis, in conjunction with the United States, made him flights with F-35s into Iran, and the S-400s could do nothing. The people who've spent billions on this junk from Russia are stuck with stuff that doesn't work well against Western armaments, particularly not against advanced Western armaments like the F-35 or the F-22. Forget about it.
Yeah. So I don't know what
it only works against what can it work against? Russian ordnance.
I think that's why they're pushing it.
It's low grade. It's low grade. The Patriot missiles are not as advanced as a newer generation of anti-ballistic missiles or the Israeli Arrow system. It's not as advanced. Even the Patriots are a fairly old system, but they're not cutting edge, but they would be advanced for the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Russia is just not up to it.
Yeah. And I mean, I knew Ukraine wants his armaments. Jay, you got something to say about Zelensky, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to add about Zelensky. What's so scary about this situation, we have a man in Zelensky that really, I think in his mind, believes he can take back the Crimea for Ukraine. And to be able to say that, which he said back in November about this time, it's completely denying the reality of the situation in Ukraine at this point to even fantasize about such things. And then on top of that, you look at the United States, who is also, they're not taking a realistic look of what's going on. They're not looking about what's actually happening on the ground with the people of Ukraine. They're conscripting people from the civilian population to fight against hardened veterans in the Russian army. and then no one is brokering for peace.
None.
So this is such a scary situation, because you have Putin, who doesn't have any morals or any compass whatsoever. But on top of that, you have a person like Zelensky, who is completely detached from reality.
Mm,
The reality that he is leading his entire nation into genocide,
yeah.
into obliteration. And then on top of that, you also have the United States government willing and ready to fund the death of Ukrainians.
Mm.
And for what? To line their pocketbooks with new
Yes.
armaments.
I have nothing
Boeing.
good to say about Putin. But one of the reasons the NATO, the European Union, and the United States are taking such a hard line is because Putin is a Russian populist. In other words, he's not World Economic Forum. He's not a globalist. If he was a globalist, it would be a very different scenario than the one we're facing. And again,
Absolutely.
that's not to defend Putin and
No,
what
no,
he's doing.
I think you're right. Listen to this: $100 billion was sent to the U.S. to Ukraine in 10 months. The biggest, I guess, recipients of some of these contracts: Boeing, Raytheon, and CIA. I've gotten a lot of money out of this. $100 billion in 10 months. Well, meanwhile, the Russian military budget for this year, Jacob, take a look at this: 65 billion. 65 billion is the whole entire military budget for them. 100 billion in 10 months has been sent from the U.S. to Ukraine. It certainly has to do with Zelensky. Certainly has to
And
do
where it
with
says CIA, 10% will go to things like reconnaissance and surveillance and espionage. 90% is funding mercenaries.
yes,
Oh.
yes, regime change style.
Contractors.
Sorry about that. Maybe because Zelensky likes to wear high heels, and the U.S. is going woke, and it's going high heel too.
Yes.
Maybe that's the relationship there.